The accusation came on the day they buried Thomas, when his mother looked across the grave and said loud enough for everyone to hear that a woman who could not give her son children had no right to wear his ring. Victoria Ellsworth felt the words strike her like stones. Each syllable meant to wound, meant to break, and she stood there in her black mourning dress with dirt under her fingernails from helping dig the grave, because that was what you did in Breckenridge, Colorado in 1882, when winter made the ground hard as iron and undertakers charged double for the labor. Thomas had been her husband for 3 years, and in that time, Victoria had learned the weight of expectation, the heaviness of hope deferred, the way his family looked at her belly each month with questions in their eyes that turned slowly to accusations in their mouths. He had died of pneumonia 2 weeks before Christmas, coughing blood into rags she burned in the stove, holding her hand and telling her it was not her fault. None of it was her fault, but his mother Constance and his brother Daniel did not see things that way. They saw a woman of 24 who had failed in her most basic duty, and now that Thomas was gone, they wanted her gone too. The ranch had been in the Ellsworth family for 20 years, carved out of nothing when Colorado was still raw territory, and Constance made it clear that Victoria had no claim to it now. Daniel stood beside his mother with his hat in his hands, and his eyes cold as the December wind that swept down from the mountains. He was 30 and unmarried himself, with a face like weathered leather and a temperament to match. He had never liked Victoria, had never thought she was good enough for his younger brother, and now he had the excuse he needed to say so. "You will leave by the end of the week," Constance said after the mourners had dispersed, after the neighbors had gone back to their own homesteads with promises of prayers and casseroles. "This land belongs to blood family, and you have proven you cannot provide that." Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to say that she had worked this land as hard as any of them, that she had nursed Thomas through his final days, that marriage meant something even without children. But the words stuck in her throat because some part of her believed them, believed that her body had failed, that she was broken in some fundamental way that made her less than whole. So she packed her things in silence while the wind howled outside and the mountains stood indifferent against the winter sky. She had nowhere to go. Her own parents were dead, claimed by cholera when she was 19, and she had no siblings, no cousins, no family except the one that was casting her out. Breckenridge was a mining town that had seen better days, perched at 10,000 feet where the air was thin and the winters brutal. Most of the big strikes had played out, and what remained was a hardscrabble community of ranchers and small-time prospectors and people too stubborn to leave. Victoria had $47 saved from selling eggs and butter, and she knew it would not last long. On her last day at the ranch, she stood in the bedroom she had shared with Thomas and looked at the quilt they had bought together in Denver, the wash basin he had used every morning, the window that looked out toward the peaks of the 10-mile range. She was saying goodbye to more than a place. She was saying goodbye to the life she had imagined, the children she had hoped for, the future that had seemed possible before it all came apart. Daniel found her there as she was folding the last of her clothes. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "You should have tried harder." Victoria turned to look at him, this man who had never shown her a moment of kindness, and something broke open inside her. "You think I did not try. You think I did not pray every night. You think I did not want children." "Wanting is not enough," Daniel said. "This ranch needs heirs." Thomas knew that. He was starting to see you were not enough. The lie was so casual, so cruel that Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. "Thomas never said that. He loved me." "He was disappointed," Daniel insisted. "He told me so. Said he had made a mistake, married for affection instead of good sense." Victoria knew it was not true, could hear in her memory Thomas whispering that he loved her, that she was enough, that they would be happy regardless. But doubt was an insidious thing, and Daniel knew how to plant it. She picked up her bag and pushed past him without another word because there was nothing left to say. She took a room at the boarding house on Main Street, a narrow space with an iron bed and a window that looked out at the feed store. Mrs. Kowalski, who ran the place, was a Polish woman with kind eyes and too many questions. She wanted to know what had happened, why Victoria was not staying at the ranch, whether there would be family coming to fetch her. Victoria gave vague answers and paid for 2 weeks upfront because that was all she could afford. The town felt different now that she had no place in it. People who had been friendly at church now looked away when she passed on the street. Constance had been talking, spreading her poison, and Victoria could feel the judgment settling over her like snow. She was the Barren woman, the failed wife, the one who could not do the most natural thing in the world. She looked for work but found none. The hotel did not need help. The general store had all the clerks it required. The saloon owner laughed when she inquired, said he did not hire respectable women and she did not look desperate enough to be otherwise. By the end of January, Victoria was down to $18 and a rising sense of panic. She had started skipping meals, eating bread and whatever scraps Mrs. Kowalski offered, trying to make her money stretch. The cold was relentless, seeping through the thin walls of the boarding house, and she wore all her clothes to bed just to keep from freezing. She thought about leaving Breckenridge, going to Denver or further, but stage fare was expensive and she had no prospects waiting anywhere else. That was when she met Ryder Zimmerman. He came into the boarding house looking for a room on an afternoon when the temperature was below zero and the sky was the color of old iron. Victoria was in the common room mending one of her 2 dresses, trying to make it last because she could not afford another. Mrs. Kowalski was showing him the available space, and Victoria heard his voice before she saw him. A low rumble with a Texas drawl that spoke of places far from these mountains. When he walked into the common room, she looked up and their eyes met. He was tall and lean with shoulders that came from hard work, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water. He wore a sheepskin coat and leather gloves and had the look of a man who had spent his life outdoors. There was a gentleness in his face despite the weathering, a quietness that felt like the opposite of Daniel's hard anger. "This is Mrs. Ellsworth," Mrs. Kowalski said, gesturing to Victoria. "She is staying with us as well." Ryder touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." Victoria nodded and went back to her sewing, aware that he was still looking at her, aware that Mrs. Kowalski was already starting her matchmaking calculations. The Polish woman had been dropping hints for weeks that Victoria should find another husband, that a young woman alone was a tragedy waiting to happen, that there were good men who would not care about her history. Victoria had ignored these suggestions because she was still in mourning, still raw, still trying to figure out how to survive one day at a time. Ryder took the room at the end of the hall and proved to be a quiet neighbor. He worked for one of the freight companies, hauling supplies between Breckenridge and the smaller camps up in the mountains. It was brutal work in winter, dangerous and exhausting, but it paid better than most jobs and he seemed suited to it. Victoria would see him in the mornings before he left, stomping snow from his boots, smelling of leather and cold air. He always nodded to her, always tipped his hat, but he did not press for conversation, and she was grateful for that. 3 weeks after he arrived, Victoria came back to the boarding house to find Constance waiting for her in the parlor. The older woman sat with her back straight and her hands folded, radiating righteous certainty. Victoria felt her stomach drop. "I heard you were asking after work," Constance said without preamble, "begging for it from what folks say." "I need to support myself," Victoria replied, keeping her voice steady. "You could have stayed if you had done your duty," Constance said. "But since you failed at that, I have come to collect what belongs to my family." She held out her hand, and Victoria saw she meant the wedding ring, the simple gold band that Thomas had placed on her finger 3 years ago. It was the only thing of value Victoria owned, and she had not considered that anyone would try to take it. "This was Thomas's gift to me," Victoria said. "It was my grandmother's ring," Constance corrected. "It stays in the family, the real family." The demand was legal nowhere, born purely of cruelty, and Victoria knew she could refuse. But she also knew that Constance would make her life even more difficult, would spread more rumors, would poison what little goodwill remained. She twisted the ring from her finger, feeling it catch on her knuckle, and dropped it into Constance's palm without a word. Constance smiled, a cold thing without warmth. "You should leave Breckenridge. There is nothing for you here." After she left, Victoria sat in the parlor and stared at her bare hand. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything that had mattered. The ring had been a symbol, proof that she had been loved once, and now even that was gone. She did not cry because she had no tears left. She just sat there as the light faded and the cold deepened, and wondered how much more could be taken from her. Ryder found her that way when he came back from his route. He stood in the doorway of the parlor, covered in snow, and looked at her with concern in his creek water eyes. "Are you all right, Mrs. Ellsworth?" The question was so simple, so genuine, that Victoria felt something crack in her chest. "No," she said, "I am not all right." He came into the room, leaving puddles of melted snow, and sat down in the chair across from her. He did not touch her, did not offer empty platitudes, just waited. And somehow that patience, that willingness to simply be present, loosened her tongue. She told him everything. About Thomas dying, about the accusations, about being cast out. About Constance taking the ring, about having no money and no prospects and no idea what came next. The words poured out of her in a rush. All the pain and fear and anger she had been holding, and Ryder listened to all of it without interruption. When she finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Family is more than blood." Victoria looked at him, not understanding. "What they did to you," Ryder continued, "that is not how family acts. I have seen more loyalty between strangers than what you got from those people. Blood does not give anyone the right to be cruel." "They think I failed," Victoria whispered. "And maybe I did." "You did not fail at anything," Ryder said firmly. "Sometimes bodies do not do what we want. That does not make you less, does not mean you do not deserve kindness and respect. Anyone who says otherwise is a fool." The words settled over Victoria like a warm blanket, and she felt tears finally come, silent and hot, on her cheeks. Ryder pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her, and she took it with shaking hands. They sat there in the darkening parlor, two people who barely knew each other, and Victoria felt less alone than she had in months. Over the following weeks, a quiet friendship developed between them. Ryder would knock on her door in the mornings and ask if she wanted coffee before he left for work. Victoria would accept, and they would sit in the common room with Mrs. Kowalski fussing around them, talking about small things. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to a fever outbreak when he was 16, about drifting north through Kansas and Nebraska until he ended up in Colorado. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about the hope she had felt when they married and moved west. "You miss him?" Ryder asked one morning. "Every day," Victoria said honestly, but not the way I expected. I miss who we were at the beginning, before the pressure of children became everything. Those last months, we barely talked about anything else. It poisoned things between us, made us strangers in our own bed. Ryder nodded slowly. My mother used to say that suffering either brings people together or drives them apart. There is no middle ground. It drove us apart, Victoria admitted. And I hate that. I hate that we did not get more time to fix it. You cannot carry that blame, Ryder said gently. You did the best you could with what you had. His kindness was foreign to Victoria, so different from the harsh judgment she had grown accustomed to. She found herself looking forward to their morning conversations, to the way he listened without trying to fix everything, to the steadiness of his presence. He was not like Thomas, who had been quick to laugh and quick to anger. Ryder was calmer, more measured, someone who thought before he spoke and meant what he said. In mid-February, Victoria's money ran out. She sat in her room counting her last few coins and felt desperation claw at her throat. She had pawned everything she could, had stretched every penny until it screamed, but there was nothing left. She owed Mrs. Kowalski for the next week, and she had no way to pay. She went downstairs to confess her situation and found Ryder in the common room. He was mending a harness, his hands moving with practiced ease, and he looked up when she entered. Something in her face must have given her away because he set the leather aside and stood. What happened? I am out of money, Victoria said, the words bitter in her mouth. I cannot pay for the room. I do not know what to do. Ryder was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, I will cover it. No, Victoria said immediately. I cannot accept that. You barely know me. I know enough, Ryder said, and I have the money. It is not charity. It is one person helping another. You would do the same if positions were reversed. You do not know that, Victoria protested, but he stepped closer, his eyes serious. Yes, I do. I have watched you help Mrs. Kowalski with chores even though you do not have to. I have seen you share your bread with the children who come begging at the door. You are a good person who has had bad things happen, and there is no shame in accepting help. Victoria felt her eyes sting. I will pay you back. I swear I will. I am not worried about that, Ryder said. Just promise me you will not give up, that you will keep fighting. She promised, and he paid Mrs. Kowalski for the next month, waving off Victoria's protests. The Polish woman gave them both knowing looks but said nothing, and Victoria felt a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. She was now indebted to this man, this stranger who had shown her more kindness than her own husband's family. She tried harder to find work, going to every business in town, offering to do laundry or mending or cooking. Most turned her away, some more politely than others. The few who showed interest lost it when they learned who she was, when Constance's rumors reached their ears. Victoria began to understand that she had been marked, labeled as defective, and no amount of hard work would erase that stain. Ryder noticed her growing despair. One evening after he returned from a particularly difficult run, he found her sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her without invitation. I have an idea, he said after a while. Victoria looked at him, waiting. The freight company needs someone to manage the books, keep track of supplies and routes. It is not much, but it pays. I talked to my boss, told him I knew someone who could do the work. He is willing to give you a trial if you are interested. Victoria felt hope flare in her chest, bright and painful. Why would you do that for me? Ryder met her eyes. Because you deserve a chance. Because what happened to you is not fair. Because I like you and want to see you succeed. The last part made her flush, made her aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from his body despite the cold. She had been trying not to think about the way her heart sped up when he entered a room, the way she looked forward to seeing him. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas, even though Thomas had been dead for 3 months, even though her marriage had been troubled long before he passed. "I would like that," she said quietly. "Thank you." She started work the following week in a small office above the livery stable. The job was exactly as Ryder described, keeping ledgers and tracking inventory, writing up contracts and managing schedules. It was indoor work, clean work, and it paid enough that Victoria could start repaying Ryder and still have money for food. The freight company owner, Mr. Hutchins, was gruff but fair, and he did not seem to care about her history. He cared whether she showed up on time and did the work correctly, and Victoria was determined to exceed his expectations. She was good at the job, better than she expected. She had always had a head for numbers, and the organizational work came naturally. Within 2 weeks, Mr. Hutchins was praising her efficiency, saying she had brought order to a system that had been chaotic for years. Victoria felt pride bloom in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. She was capable. She was valuable. She was more than what Constance had tried to reduce her to. Spring came slowly to the high country, winter reluctant to release its grip. But by early April, the snow was melting and the creeks were running high, and there was green pushing up through the brown earth. Victoria felt something thaw inside her as well, a loosening of the tight knot of pain she had carried. She was surviving. More than that, she was beginning to build something new. Her feelings for Ryder had grown impossible to ignore. She found herself thinking about him constantly, remembering the way he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentleness in his hands. He was always respectful, always appropriate, but there were moments when she caught him looking at her with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. They had developed rituals, small intimacies that felt both innocent and charged. He would walk her home from work even though it was out of his way. She would save him a seat at dinner. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking until the stars came out. One night in late April, after they had been talking for hours about everything and nothing, Ryder said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes," Victoria said, though her heart was pounding. "Do you think you could ever love someone again, after Thomas?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Victoria thought about how to answer, wanting to be honest but also wanting to be fair to herself, to Thomas, to whatever was growing between them. "I think I already do," she said quietly. Ryder turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Victoria, I know it has not been long," she rushed on. "I know people would judge, but I cannot help how I feel. You have been kinder to me than anyone, have seen me at my worst and still chosen to stay. I think about you all the time. I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks, and I was too afraid to admit it." The confession spilled out of her, and she waited for him to pull back, to tell her it was too soon, to say he did not feel the same. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I have been in love with you since that day in the parlor when you told me your story," he said. "I have been trying to be respectful, to give you time, but every day it gets harder. I want to be with you, Victoria. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met." Victoria felt tears spill over, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You do not care that I might not be able to give you children." "I care about you," Ryder said firmly. "Everything else we can figure out. And for what it is worth, I think those people were wrong. I think your body is just fine, and even if it is not, even if we never have children of our own, there are other ways to make a family. We could adopt. We could take in children who need homes. Family is more than blood, remember?" The echo of his earlier words made Victoria smile through her tears. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, but then his arms came around her and she felt herself melt into him. It was so different from kissing Thomas, different in ways she could not name but felt in her bones. This was right. This was real. This was what love was supposed to feel like. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me, Victoria Ellsworth? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were never broken, never less than enough?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in the same church where Victoria had attended Thomas's funeral. It was a small ceremony, just Mrs. Kowalski and Mr. Hutchins, and a few people from the freight company. Constance and Daniel did not attend, of course, but Victoria found she did not care. She wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers that Ryder had picked himself, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, she felt a joy so complete it took her breath away. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room cabin that needed work but had good bones. Ryder threw himself into fixing it up, and Victoria helped, the two of them working side by side to make it a home. They painted the walls and mended the roof and built furniture from lumber Ryder hauled back from his routes. It was hard work, but it was theirs, built together with love and sweat and determination. The town slowly began to accept them. Mr. Hutchins spoke highly of Victoria's work, and Ryder had earned respect through his own labor and integrity. People stopped whispering when they walked by. Some even nodded or tipped their hats. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was a start. Their marriage was everything Victoria's first one had not been. They talked about everything, shared their fears and hopes and dreams. They laughed together, worked together, made plans for the future. And in bed, Ryder was patient and attentive in ways that made Victoria understand what she had been missing. He took time with her, made sure she was satisfied, treated her pleasure as important as his own. She had not known it could be like this, that physical love could be both passionate and tender. Summer arrived in full glory, and Victoria spent her evenings tending a garden behind their house. She planted vegetables and herbs, worked the soil with her hands, and felt a contentment she had never known. Ryder would come home from his routes and find her there, dirt under her nails and sun on her face, and he would pull her close and tell her she was beautiful. In August, Victoria realized her monthly cycle was late. She tried not to think about it, tried not to hope, because hope had hurt so much before. But as days turned to weeks, she began to wonder. She felt different, tired in a way that was new, sensitive to smells and tastes. She said nothing to Ryder, afraid to jinx it, afraid of being wrong. Finally, she went to see Dr. Matthews, the town physician. He was an older man with a gentle manner, and he examined her carefully before delivering his verdict. "You are with child, Mrs. Zimmerman." "About 10 weeks along, I would say." Victoria stared at him, unable to process the words. "That is not possible. I cannot have children. Everyone said so." Dr. Matthews smiled. "Everyone was wrong. Your body is perfectly capable. Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances, the right partner, the right time. Stress and unhappiness can affect these things more than people realize. You were under tremendous pressure in your first marriage, and that may have made conception difficult. But you are healthy and young, and there is no reason to think you will not carry this baby to term." Victoria walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat belly. She had been so certain she was barren, had internalized that label so completely, that the truth felt impossible. But the doctor had been clear, and now that she was paying attention, she could feel the changes in her body, the subtle shifts that signaled new life. She found Ryder in their small barn, tending to his horse. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down the brush and come to her immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked, worry creasing his brow. "Nothing is wrong," Victoria said, and then she started to laugh, giddy and amazed. "Everything is right. I am pregnant, Ryder. We are going to have a baby." His face went through a series of expressions, shock and disbelief, and then pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping loud enough to startle the horse. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "I was not broken," Victoria whispered, the realization still sinking in. "They were wrong about me." "I told you," Ryder said, cupping her face in his hands. "I told you that you were perfect exactly as you are. I am so happy, Victoria, so incredibly happy." They held each other in the barn while the horse munched hay, and the afternoon light slanted through the cracks in the walls. Victoria felt vindicated and validated, and more than that, she felt loved. This baby was not the result of pressure or expectation. This baby was created from genuine love and mutual respect, and that made all the difference. Word spread quickly through Breckenridge. Victoria continued working through her pregnancy, and her growing belly was visible proof that the accusations against her had been false. People who had judged her now looked away in shame. Mrs. Kowalski cried with joy and immediately began knitting blankets. Mr. Hutchins gruffly congratulated her and told her the job would be waiting whenever she was ready to return. Constance heard the news and came to confront Victoria one last time. She appeared at the cabin in October, her face pinched and angry. "You are carrying a child," she said flatly. "Yes," Victoria replied, hand resting protectively on her swollen abdomen. "It should have been Thomas's," Constance spat. "You should have been able to give him a son." Victoria looked at this bitter woman who had caused her so much pain and felt nothing but pity. "Maybe it should have been, but it was not, and there is nothing anyone can do to change that." "I have moved on, Constance. I suggest you do the same." "You took the easy way," Constance accused. "Found yourself a new husband before Thomas was cold in his grave." "I found someone who treats me with kindness and respect," Victoria corrected. "Someone who sees me as a person, not just a womb to carry his legacy. That is not taking the easy way. That is choosing to live instead of just surviving." Constance opened her mouth to say something else, but Ryder appeared in the doorway behind Victoria. He did not say a word, just stood there with his arms crossed, and something in his stance made Constance back down. She turned and left without another word, and Victoria never saw her again. The baby came in late February, a difficult labor that lasted through the night and into the next day. Dr. Matthews attended, with Mrs. Kowalski helping, and Ryder paced the front room wearing a path in the floorboards. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, the doctor called Ryder in to meet his son. Victoria was exhausted, sweat-soaked and trembling, but when Ryder placed the baby in her arms, she felt a rush of love so powerful it brought fresh tears. The baby had dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would probably change color, and he was perfect in every way. "What should we name him?" Ryder asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at his wife and son with wonder. "What about James?" Victoria suggested. "After your father," Ryder's eyes went bright with emotion. "James Zimmerman, I like that. They had a son." Against all odds, despite everything she had been told, Victoria had carried a healthy baby to term and delivered him safely. The vindication was sweet, but sweeter still was the knowledge that she had built a real family, one based on love rather than obligation. Caring for James was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a hungry baby, constantly nursing, and Victoria felt like she never slept those first months. but Ryder was hands-on in a way she suspected Thomas never would have been. He changed diapers and walked the floor when James fussed, and sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work and the joy. Victoria returned to her bookkeeping job when James was 4 months old, bringing him to the office in a basket. Mr. Hutchins pretended to be annoyed but was secretly delighted, and the freight company workers competed for the honor of holding the baby. James was a happy child, quick to smile, and he seemed to thrive on the attention. Life settled into a rhythm. Ryder continued his freight routes, Victoria managed the books, and James grew bigger and more alert. They added chickens to their small homestead, then a milk cow, slowly building something sustainable. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch James play in the dirt, and Victoria would think about how far she had come, how different her life was from what she had imagined. When James was 18 months old, Victoria found herself pregnant again. This time there was no fear, no doubt, just quiet happiness. The second baby, a girl they named Sarah, arrived in the spring with much less drama than her brother. She had Victoria's features and Ryder's calm temperament, and James was fascinated by his little sister. They were a family now, a real family, and Victoria understood what Ryder had meant when he said family was more than blood. It was the people you chose and who chose you. It was showing up day after day, through hard times and good. It was seeing someone at their worst and loving them anyway. It was building something together from nothing but hope and determination. Daniel sold the Ellsworth ranch 3 years after Thomas died and moved to Wyoming. Constance went to live with a sister in Nebraska. Victoria heard these things through the town gossip and felt no satisfaction in their misfortune. She had stopped caring what they thought or did. They were part of a past that no longer had power over her. By the time James was 5 and Sarah was 3, the Zimmerman cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 rooms and a real porch. Ryder had been promoted to route manager at the freight company, and Victoria had become indispensable to Mr. Hutchins. They were respected members of the community, invited to church socials and town meetings. People who had once shunned Victoria now sought her advice and friendship. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Victoria on a picnic up into the mountains, leaving the children with Mrs. Kowalski. They rode for an hour until they reached a meadow filled with wildflowers, the peaks rising all around them, the air so clear it hurt to breathe. They spread a blanket and ate fried chicken and biscuits, and when they were finished, Ryder pulled Victoria close and said, "Do you remember what you told me that night on the porch, when I asked if you could love again?" "I remember everything about that night," Victoria said. "You said you thought you already did," Ryder continued. "And I have thought about that a lot over the years, about how brave you were to admit it, how scared you must have been. I want you to know that every day since then, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Zimmerman." Victoria kissed him, tasting salt and sunshine. "You saved me," she said. "When I had nothing, when I was completely alone, you saw something in me worth saving." "No," Ryder said firmly, "you saved yourself. I just helped a little. You are the one who kept fighting, who refused to give up. I am proud to be your husband." They made love there in the meadow with the mountains watching, and afterward they lay in the grass and talked about the future. About maybe having another baby, or maybe adopting children who needed homes like Ryder had suggested years ago. About expanding their homestead, about growing old together, about all the ordinary, extraordinary things that made up a life. When James turned 7, Victoria and Ryder took in their first foster child, a girl named Lucy whose parents had died of tuberculosis. She was 6 and terrified and did not speak for the first month. But slowly, with patience and love, she began to open up. Sarah declared Lucy her new best friend, and James took his role as big brother seriously. Within 6 months, they had officially adopted her, and Lucy became Lucy Zimmerman. 2 years later, they took in twin boys whose father had been killed in a mining accident and whose mother could not support them. The twins, Matthew and Michael, were 9 and full of energy and trouble. They kept everyone on their toes, but they also brought laughter and life to the house. Ryder taught them to ride and rope, and Victoria taught them to read and write. They were a handful, but they were family. The house had to be expanded again to accommodate everyone, and Ryder built on 2 more rooms with help from neighbors. The Zimmerman homestead became known as a place of warmth and acceptance, and people in Breckenridge would sometimes ask if they could take in another child who needed help. Victoria always said yes if they had space. She remembered too well what it felt like to have nowhere to go, to be judged and found wanting, and she was determined that no child in her care would ever feel that way. By the time Victoria turned 40, she and Ryder had 8 children, a mix of biological and adopted. The house was chaotic and loud and full of love. Mealtimes were boisterous affairs with everyone talking over each other. Bedtime required military precision to get everyone settled, but Victoria would not have traded it for anything. She thought about Thomas sometimes, usually late at night when the house was finally quiet and she could hear Ryder breathing beside her. She had loved Thomas in her own way, but it had been a love built on expectations and societal pressure. What she had with Ryder was different, deeper, more real. It was a love that had survived hardship and doubt, that had been tested and proven strong. Sarah, their biological daughter, was the one who asked the hard questions as she got older. When she was 12, she came to Victoria and said, "Lucy told me you were married before, that you could not have babies with your first husband." Victoria had known this conversation would come eventually. She invited Sarah to sit with her on the porch, the place where so many important talks had happened. "That is true," Victoria said. "I was married to a man named Thomas, and we were not able to have children together. When he died, his family blamed me for it. They said I was broken, that I had failed in my duty. They made me leave, and I had nowhere to go. But then you had me and James," Sarah said, confused. "So you were not broken?" "No, I was not," Victoria agreed. "But I believed I was for a long time. It took your father to help me see the truth. He told me that family is more than blood, and he was right. Look at our family, Sarah. We are made up of people who found each other, who chose each other. Some of you came from me, and some of you came to me, but all of you are loved exactly the same." "You wish you had children with Thomas?" Sarah asked. Victoria thought about how to answer honestly without hurting her daughter. "I wish Thomas had lived. I wish his family had been kinder. But I do not wish I had children with him, because if I had, I would not have the life I have now. I would not have your father, would not have you and James exactly as you are. Everything happened the way it was supposed to, even when it hurt." Sarah leaned against her mother, and Victoria wrapped an arm around her. They sat there watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, and Victoria felt peace settle over her. This was her family. This was her life. And it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. Ryder joined them a few minutes later, settling on Victoria's other side. James came out with a book, followed by Lucy with her doll, and then the twins with their constant chatter. They all crowded onto the porch, a tangle of arms and legs and love, and Victoria looked at each face and felt her heart swell. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked quietly, his hand finding hers. "How lucky I am," Victoria said. "How grateful." "We are the lucky ones," Ryder replied. Every single one of us. The children eventually dispersed, called inside by the promise of dessert, but Victoria and Ryder remained on the porch as night fell and the stars emerged. They had been married for 15 years, had built a life from nothing but hope and hard work and love. They had faced judgment and overcome it. They had created a family that was strong not because of blood, but because of choice. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Taking me on when I had nothing, when I was damaged goods in everyone's eyes?" Ryder turned to her, his face serious in the starlight. "Listen to me, Victoria. You were never damaged goods. You were a woman who had been treated badly, but that did not make you less. It made you stronger. And I have never, not for one single second, regretted loving you. You are the best decision I ever made." Victoria kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she said, "I used to think I was broken because I could not give Thomas children, but I understand now that it was not about my body. It was about the situation, the stress, the unhappiness. My body knew I was not in the right place to bring life into the world, and once I was safe and loved and happy, everything changed." "The body is wise that way," Ryder agreed. "It protects us even when we do not realize it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night deepen. Inside, they could hear the children laughing, hear the sounds of home and family. This was what mattered. Not what had been lost, but what had been found. Not the past with its pain and accusations, but the present with its fullness and joy. Years continued to pass, measured in birthdays and holidays and ordinary days that added up to a life. James grew into a serious young man who wanted to study law. Sarah became a teacher. Lucy found her calling as a nurse. The twins went into business together, starting a small ranch of their own. Each child found their path, and Victoria and Ryder supported them all, proud of the people they were becoming. When Victoria turned 50, the children threw her a surprise party. They had all come home, some bringing spouses and children of their own, and the house was once again filled with noise and laughter. Victoria stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by 3 generations, and marveled at what had grown from those dark days after Thomas died. Ryder found her by the window, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked. "Beyond measure," Victoria replied. "I never imagined this. When Constance told me to leave the ranch, when I was sitting in that boarding house with no money and no hope, I could not have imagined this life." "But you fought for it," Ryder reminded her. "You did not give up. That is why we are here. We fought for it," Victoria corrected. "Together." That evening, after the party wound down and the guests departed, Victoria and Ryder took their customary seats on the porch. Their hair was gray now, and their bodies moved more slowly, but the love between them had only deepened with time. They had weathered financial hardships and health scares and the normal struggles of raising a large family, and through it all, they had remained partners. "You remember the first thing you ever said to me?" Victoria asked. Ryder thought for a moment. "I think it was just Madam when Mrs. Kowalski introduced us." "No, I mean the first real thing, in the parlor after Constance took my ring. You said family is more than blood." "I remember," Ryder said, "and I meant it." "You were right," Victoria said, "about everything. This family we built, it is stronger than any blood tie because we chose it. Every single person here, we chose them and they chose us. That is powerful." "You taught me that," Ryder said. "I always knew it intellectually, but you showed me what it actually looks like in practice. You took broken things and made them whole. You took lost children and gave them a home. You took a bitter, angry situation and turned it into something beautiful." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did that, together." They sat in silence, watching the stars, thinking about all the years behind them and whatever years lay ahead. They had grown old together, had built something lasting, and that was more than most people got. The accusation that had once seemed so damning, the label of Barren that had been used to cast Victoria out, had proven false in every way that mattered. She had been fruitful beyond measure, not just in children born from her body, but in the lives she had touched and the love she had given. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, an old hymn that Victoria recognized from church. The sound drifted out into the night, mixing with the chirp of crickets and the rustle of wind through the aspens. This was home. This was family. This was the life that had come from ashes, from ruin, from the determination to keep living even when everything seemed lost. "I love you," Victoria said quietly. "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." They sat on the porch until the moon rose high and silver, casting long shadows across the yard. The house behind them was full of people they loved, people who loved them in return. The land around them was land they had worked and built upon. The future ahead was uncertain, as futures always are, but they would face it together. Victoria thought about the young woman she had been at 24, standing beside Thomas's grave while his mother hurled accusations. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the pain would not last forever, that there was a man waiting in a boarding house who would see her worth when no one else did. But maybe that woman had needed to walk through the fire to get here. Maybe the struggle had been necessary to fully appreciate the peace that came after. Constance had been wrong about so many things. Wrong about Victoria being barren. Wrong about family only mattering through blood. Wrong about a woman's worth being tied solely to her ability to bear children. And in being wrong, she had set Victoria free to find the life she was meant to have. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "About how everything works out the way it is supposed to," Victoria said. "Even when we cannot see it at the time, even when it hurts." "I am grateful for all of it, Ryder. The pain and the joy, the losses and the gains, all of it led me here to you, to this life we built." "I am grateful too," Ryder said, "for every moment, for every choice that brought us together." They stayed on the porch until late, reluctant to go inside, wanting to savor the perfection of the moment. When they finally rose and walked hand in hand to their bedroom, Victoria felt a completeness that went bone deep. She had been accused of being barren, had been cast out by people who should have protected her, had faced judgment and cruelty and loss. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She had found love with a man who understood that family was more than blood, who had proven it through years of devotion and partnership. She had raised children who knew they were valued not for their DNA, but for who they were as people. She had built a home that was a sanctuary, a place where lost souls could find belonging. As she drifted off to sleep with Ryder's arm around her, and the sounds of her family settling in for the night, Victoria smiled. The accusations had been false. The cruelty had been undeserved. But the love, the family, the life they had created together, that was all real. That was all true. And that was all that mattered in the end. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and children stirring. Victoria woke to find Ryder already up, standing by the window and looking out at their land. She joined him, and together they watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Another day," Ryder said. "Another blessing," Victoria replied. They went downstairs to start breakfast, to feed the family that had grown so large, to begin another ordinary, extraordinary day. And as Victoria mixed batter and Ryder started coffee and their children and grandchildren began to appear one by one, She felt the truth settle over her like a benediction. She had been accused of being barren. A cowboy had said family is more than blood. And together, they had proven both statements wrong and right in ways no one could have predicted. She was not barren. She was abundant. Her family was both blood and choice, both born and made, both gift and decision. And every single person in her house, every child she had brought into the world or brought into her heart, was proof that love was stronger than judgment, that kindness was more powerful than cruelty, and that the family you built yourself was the most precious family of all. The end of Victoria's story was really just a continuation, because good lives do not have neat endings. They keep going, keep growing, keep adding chapters. But if pressed to name a moment of completion, it would be this one, standing in her kitchen with flour on her hands and love in her heart, surrounded by the people who made her life worth living. She had walked through darkness and found light. She had been broken down and built back up. She had lost everything and gained something infinitely better. And when visitors came to Breckenridge and asked about the Zimmerman family, the ones with the big house full of children at the edge of town, people would smile and say they were good folks. Salt of the earth. The kind of people who took in strays and loved without condition. The kind of people who proved that family was not about blood, but about showing up, about choosing each other, about building something beautiful from nothing but hope and hard work and unshakable devotion. Victoria and Ryder grew old together, their love story becoming legend in the small mountain town. They had started with nothing, with one woman accused and abandoned, and one man willing to see her truth. And from that beginning, they had created something remarkable, something lasting, something that would ripple through generations. Their children would tell their children, who would tell their children about how love conquered judgment, about how kindness changed lives, about how a cowboy once said that family is more than blood, and then spent his life proving it true. And Victoria, who had once been told she was barren, who had been cast out and labeled as less than, would be remembered as a woman of abundance, a woman who had loved deeply and well, a woman who had turned pain into purpose and loss into legacy. That was the real ending, the one that mattered. The happily ever after that came not from fairy tales but from two people deciding that love was worth fighting for, and family was worth building, no matter what anyone else said.